Although it may not feel like it when you're sitting in traffic or waiting in an impossibly long line, the human species is about to go through a monumental and inevitable decline in population. Normally, animal populations collapse due to a major external force, like drought or disease. While climate change will be a factor in our declining population, it won't be the main one. Our collapse will be predominantly driven by one thing: our collective desire and decision to have fewer kids. There are few trends that cause more panic in capitals around the world, because this one requires a fundamental overhaul of the relationship a government has with its people. All of the government incentives in the world can't reverse this trend. So instead of avoiding our problems like we always do, I think we as Americans should understand and accept the reality on the ground and seize the opportunity. If you really zoom out on a graph of the human population over time, it's astounding. In the year 3000 BC, when the Egyptians were just getting started, there were roughly 45 million people on Earth. This is roughly equivalent to the population of just Greater Tokyo today. When Jesus himself was walking around the planet in the year 0, there were around 188 million people, which is pretty close to the population of modern-day Bangladesh. This means that over the course of 3,000 years, the population of the planet quadrupled. Fast forward to when the Declaration of Independence was penned in 1776, and the estimated global population was 800 million. Again, the population roughly quadrupled, but this time in a little less than 2,000 years. Fast forward to 1939, right before World War II, and the world population hovered around 2.3 billion. Here, the global population almost tripled, but this time in just 163 years. In 2022, the world population finally broke 8 billion, according to the UN. Again, the population more than tripled, but this time in only 83 years. If we kept going on the same trajectory, there would be 25 billion people on the planet in the year 2060. Something that I think everyone can agree doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. So what drove the human population to explode the way that it did? Well, two key things happened. The first was a drastic decrease in early childhood deaths. Now, before I say anything else, I want to first acknowledge and give my condolences to anyone watching this video who may have lost a child. Nothing could be more painful. While I'm trying to highlight macro trends in the human experience, I in no way want to minimize or belittle the tragic experiences that you had to endure or are perhaps currently enduring. It's not lost on me that behind every statistic, there are stories, and yours matters. So with that being said, when and how did the childhood mortality rate decrease? Prior to modern medicine, dying before the age of 5 was extremely common. Honestly, it was something I never really understood about history. Take France in 1750, for example. The average lifespan was 25 years, but that number is heavily skewed by the fact that nearly half of all children died before they turned 10. Now, if you lived into adulthood, it actually wasn't that uncommon for you to live to be 60, 70, or even 80. For most of human history, simply maintaining the population meant drastically overestimating how many kids to have. If you wanted 2 or 3 to survive into adulthood, you had to have 4 to 6. And then, all of a sudden, with vaccines, nutrition, and modern medicine, children stopped dying. At least not at the rates humans had experienced for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. To really grasp how dramatic this change was, just look at the numbers. In the US in the year 1800, out of 1,000 kids born, 463 died before they turned 5. In the year 1900, that number was 293. Today, that number is 7. Nonetheless, humans had adapted to have way more kids than we actually wanted, and that adaptation lingered. This is why all of our grandparents had a crazy number of siblings. In their generation, being one of 6 or 7 wasn't at all unheard of. This trend is the main driver behind the explosion seen in the human population, particularly since the year 1900. But how were we able to sustain so many people? Here, we get to the other critical piece behind our explosion, the Industrial Revolution. It's hard to pin down an exact start, but it was the main global trend throughout the 1800s and all the way up to World War II. We unlocked the power stored in fossil fuels to do the labor that, for the entirety of human existence, we had to do manually or with the help of animals. Suddenly, we could farm, manufacture, and build exponentially more than had ever been possible. So as kids started having much better odds at surviving childhood, human society was able to feed and clothe them to an extent that would have been unthinkable just 100 years earlier. So that's how we got here. But what does it mean for us today? To answer that, we need to understand 2 concepts: carrying capacity and population overshoot. In nature, everything tends towards balance. Carrying capacity, by definition, is the population that a given environment can sustain. When an animal population exceeds that threshold, the lack of resources drives the population down until it reaches a sustainable equilibrium. This is known as population overshoot, and it's the stage that we're currently in as a species. The problem is that this correction tends to be brutal. In nature, it usually involves a lot of starvation and fighting, and that's what we desperately need to avoid. To make matters worse, carrying capacity isn't just a fixed number. If you degrade the environment, the carrying capacity shrinks. And let's be frank, we're doing a whole lot of degrading. Models of human population dynamics estimate that in order to maintain our current numbers, each woman would need to have on average 2.1 children. This is termed the fertility rate. I again want to acknowledge how personal and at times painful the conversation around fertility and family planning can be, and I in no way wish to be insensitive to that fact when sharing these numbers. So as it stands, the global fertility rate hovers at 2.2 children, and it has been trending down since roughly 1965. While globally we're still above the mathematical threshold, this number is being entirely held up by less developed countries. Viewing the trends by region, North America, Latin America, Europe, and East and Southeast Asia have already dropped below the 2.1 fertility rate threshold. For example, South Korea currently has a fertility rate of 0.7. Central and South Asia, which predominantly includes the Indian subcontinent, will also soon dip below the threshold. The Middle East and Africa still have a while before they drop below this fertility rate threshold, but the trend is still the same. And as it stands, the fertility rate in the United States is 1.8. So the human population is going to decline. Maybe not this decade, but it's coming. And honestly, it feels like it's coming much faster than predicted. We're simply having fewer kids. Furthermore, the dynamic that I don't think gets talked about enough is that we are also having kids later in life. The time interval is a fundamental component of exponential growth and decay equations that in this case is being entirely overlooked. Even if we were hitting the mythical fertility rate, if women had kids every 30 years instead of every 20 years, our population would still decrease. And folks everywhere are having kids later and later, in large part because they aren't financially stable and ready until later in life. And underlying all of these trends is the critical detail that separates humans from other animals. Having kids, generally speaking, is a decision. I wish this was universally true, but the world is unfair, and women around the world don't have equal bodily autonomy or access to reproductive health care, and they should. While it had to be said, that's not the main point of this video. So what's driving people to have fewer kids? It's the simple fact that we viscerally and intuitively feel the lack of resources and are responding accordingly. Everything, everywhere is more expensive because more and more humans are trying to access a limited number of resources. Anything you want to do is harder and more expensive than even a decade or two ago. I'm in my mid-20s and there's no world where I could possibly provide a decent life for 6 kids. It's just impossible. As a species, we're intuitively realizing that in order to give our kids the best chance at success, we need to have fewer of them and invest more into preparing them for what will be a very competitive world. We're going into a phase of human history where we have 1, maybe 2 kids, and often none. And obviously, there are plenty of folks out there having lots of children. More power to you, again, just discussing macro trends. Broadly speaking, the decline of human population is a trend that is irreversible, and it will profoundly reshape the future of humanity. But that doesn't mean it will necessarily be catastrophic. The outcome depends on the choices that we make. With foresight and intention, we can manage this shift in a way that leads to a cleaner, fairer, and more sustainable world. However, doing so will require us to fundamentally change many of the systems that for so long have depended on an ever-increasing population. Many of the existing power structures will need to change, and that's why this trend terrifies governments around the world. I had planned to talk through all of the necessary steps to navigate this transition in a single video, but I decided that it really warrants a series of videos where we can unpack each component more tactfully. So, if you like my content and want to know where we need to go from here, please subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the rest of the deep dives on population.